I'd like to introduce Mark McClain as our keynote speaker tonight. As co-founder and CEO of SailPoint Technologies, Mark brings more than 30 years experience in the enterprise technology market. Under Mark's direction for the last 12 years, SailPoint has grown from a venture-backed startup to a publicly traded leader in the identity management software market. Mark directs and drives the overall vision and strategy for SailPoint, which is underpinned by his commitment and passion for building top-performing teams, creating a collaborative and innovative work environment, and focusing continuously on the needs of his customers. Over the years, Mark has received a number of awards, including an Entrepreneur of the Year, the Austin Business Journal Best CEO, and a Glassdoor CEO rating in the top 5 nationally. SailPoint has also been selected as a best place to work by the Austin Business Journal for 9 consecutive years. Mark serves as the chair of the Austin Technology Council, has served on boards of the Austin Bridge Builders Alliance, Grace Covenant Church, Explore Austin, and other nonprofits. Mark has had the privilege of being married to Marge for 32 years. They have 3 children and 3 grandchildren. Mark's favorite Bible verse comes from Isaiah 40:31. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Please join me in welcoming Mark McClain.
By the way, I'll make a quick comment. White collar, blue collar. We're just throwing you a curveball. Yeah, see, the construction guy wore a tie and I wore jeans. You gotta love Austin. Gotta love Austin. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. Thanks for joining. I've known Craig for a number of years, and I just gave a talk many years ago now at another JSN event. And I guess all those people had forgotten how bad that was, so they asked me to come back. And so here we are. But I thought what I did was prepare a few thoughts on how I think about the job market, how people approach it, how to think about that from your perspective as a job seeker. We've all been in that position at some point. The one sure way to not have to go find a job is to start a company that has its own risks. We can talk about that later. But yeah, so that's where we'll cover tonight. And I guess we don't really have Q&A time. I guess you can tell me at the end if we don't. If we don't, you can grab me out there as long as your question is not too rude or weird. Okay, that's the deal. All right, well, so I titled this little talk, Finding Your Place in the Marketplace. I think, as I understand it, there's some of the folks here who are unemployed, I can try to get my terms right, unemployed, and others who are underemployed, meaning you're not sure you're in the right fit. And so I think the thought here is what's the way to think about finding the best place for you out in the marketplace? Where do you think, you know, if you have a religious view, where do you think God's calling you? If you don't have that view, where do you just think you're going to fit well? And so we'll talk about a few ways to think about that tonight. I'm going to give you the, as they say, obligatory credibility info, which actually Joe mostly just covered, so we'll blow through that really fast. So we're going to talk really about 4 things. One is this concept of knowing yourself. I think if you're going to get out into the job market and talk to potential employers, the first thing is to know yourself, right? Because you are the product, as it were. You're pitching your product to a potential hiring person. You need to know yourself really well. We're going to talk about knowing the company or the job that you're looking at. How do you think about that? What's some of the ways to frame that a little bit? I'm going to give you what I think are the really important hiring questions that happen in an interview, and you probably won't hear them spoken out loud. That's why it's a little super secret thing here. We'll talk about how to think about when you're sitting with someone that they may be thinking these thoughts. And then lastly, I'm going to give you a little view that I've stolen from one of my favorite authors, Pat Lencioni, about this concept of an ideal team player. What's the perfect kind of employee or team player that we think about? You heard that. I did some stuff. I got some awards. Yay. Good for me. And, but most importantly, oh, I skipped it too fast. The last one there. I was recently voted Best Grandpa by Melanie, Morgan, and Malia. So, yeah. It was a pretty small sample set of people there, but I think it's important to note that I did win. So that's important. Yeah, I'm hoping for another shot next year. Might be Best Grandpa 2 years in a row. So let's talk about knowing yourself. Oh, we lost the builds. That's okay. I think at one point these were going to go bing, bing, bing. That's okay. You can track with me. It'll be fine. When you think about knowing yourself, the first thought, I think, is kind of knowing your design. Joe just used that concept of, I think God wires us, or we're designed. If you think of it as DNA, the nurture, nature words get thrown around. Kind of, who are you? And I think there's tools out there to help you with this, right? Everybody's, or not everybody, most of you are probably familiar with Myers-Briggs or DISC or things like that, right? Just how did you get wired? What is it you think about? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Do you operate best in a team or individual environment? Knowing how you're designed and wired is kind of step one if you're going to go out and talk to people about what you'd like to do, right? If the last time you had a leadership role was in fourth grade student council, I wouldn't recommend you go position yourself as a world-class leader, right? That's just reality. You may be a fantastic individual contributor, but be realistic about that, about your design and how you're wired. A second is to know your strengths. There's a good book out there. I think you guys said it's not part of your curriculum, but it's called Strengths Finders. Extra bonus, even beyond what the job seekers folks tell you, I'd go pick up that book. I think it's $12. The premise behind that book I really like, and that is a lot of us in our early career coaching, we would sit for job reviews and performance reviews and things like that. And what does a manager typically do? They say, here's what you're doing well. Here's what you're doing not so well. And what do you then spend your time on generally? The not so well, right? Let's fix all that stuff you're not so good at. I think there's a growing body of thinking that says that's a dumb way to think. The right way to think is, here's what you're good at, here's what you're not so good at. Let's make sure we can get you focused on getting even better at what you're good at and spend your time in your job on things you're good at. And we will hire other people to do the things you're not so good at. My super simple way, apologies to the Apple folks, I use Microsoft references for things like this. One of the ways to assess this is, are you a Word person, a PowerPoint person, or an Excel person, right? If a spreadsheet causes you to run screaming from the room, you should not go into finance, right? These are simple assessments I can help you with. If a PowerPoint makes you run screaming from the room, you should not go into marketing, right? If Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and Excel all make you run screaming from the room, you should probably not have a computer involved in your job, right? So knowing who you are, how you're wired, what you enjoy doing, and what over time you've proven to be good at, pretty basic stuff, right? Know your experience. The reason that's so basic, right? We all get resumes or LinkedIn profiles where we go through experience, but a lot of times when I read those things, I'm kind of disappointed, I guess is a good word, because you think, okay, this person's just kind of very objectively telling me kind of what they did. I want to know the impact they had. So when I say know your experience, what I'm telling you, and you're thinking about going into a discussion with someone, explain to them the impact that you had in whatever you did, right? And there's schools of thought that says you need metrics on this. Yeah, where it makes sense, use a metric, right? We grew by a lot. Doesn't sound as good as we grew by 327%. But the point is to tell people the impact that you think you had. That's what I mean by knowing your experience. Understand how to describe that because I was there, these things happened. Had I not been there, they might not have, right? And probably most importantly, know your values. It's always fun to poke at very public negative stories because I can't get in trouble as far as I know. What happened at Uber was pretty painful, right? I mean, here you have this incredible growth company going and blowing, amazing story. If you're a taxi driver, maybe you're not so fond, but anyways, it's been an amazing story. And then the thing kind of starts to crumble from the inside, right? It comes out that there's just really, really bad values in the leadership. And sadly, what starts to happen in the press is the board, as it begins to engage in that, displays its own really bad values. So I would say when you're thinking about yourself, understand the values you care about, because as you'll see when we get to the company in the next slide, their values and your values need to fundamentally match, or it's probably not going to work well. And by the way, this is not, I'm in kind of a maybe religious-friendly audience tonight. This is not only a positive alignment, it's a negative alignment, right? If your values are like a lot of the people in this room, I think might be, you're probably not going to want to go hang out in Vegas because your values are not going to align. There are people who really should go work in Vegas because their values align. But the point is, find out what your values are, find out what the company's values are, and look for alignment. It's that simple. Let's go on to the company and the job. The first thought here is the idea of the industry, and particularly the business that you're talking to. I can tell you one thing that really shuts me down very early on in an interview cycle is someone goes, yeah, I didn't have time to look at your website. I'm not really sure what you guys do. okay, we're probably done here, right? I mean, frankly, that doesn't happen very often. But to be fair, if a candidate didn't take the time to understand a bit about who we are and what we did, I certainly don't feel compelled to spend a lot of time understanding them and how they could add value to my organization, right? We're giving up, in our case, typically an 8-hour day and 45 to an hour of minutes time from 7 or 8 very busy, very, very important people. And you respect us by showing up prepared, understanding who we are. We don't expect you to know our business like we know it. I've seen sometimes where people say, come in and be prepared to give a sales pitch for that company. Well, that's kind of silly. You don't know us like we know us. I get that. But understand who we are, where we fit in the industry, show that you've done some research and some homework. That just says, okay, this person is serious. They know something about us and who we are. That's kind of table stakes, right? Who's this company? What industry are they in? What do they do? The next thought, I've done a decent amount of career coaching informally. I'm not a pro, so you don't want to trust my advice. But I've done some of this, and what I've learned to help, especially early stage job seekers think about is these two words, content and context. Let me tell you a very simple example. When you say I'm a salesman, if you're a salesman for a car company versus a salesman for IBM, those jobs are sort of in the same domain, but barely, right? So there's the content of what you do. Are you selling? Are you analyzing? Are you developing content? There's a lot of content things. And then there's the context in which you are doing that. And I think if you're thinking about where to go look for jobs and things, you want to think about both the content of what you want to work on and the context in which you want to do it. The simplest example is actually the next one, which is scope and scale. It turns out that it's really different to work for a 5-person company than a 5,000-person company. Hopefully you've already figured that out. There's not a lot of people in here who probably that was new data for. But this idea that the content and the context taken in the context of scale and scope are sort of the fundamental dimensions of a job, right? What are you working on? In what context are you doing it? At what scope? And at what scale? Kind of, I think of one as width and one as depth, right? So you want to come in when you're sitting down with someone to talk about a position, understanding not just who they are, what's the business all about, what industry they're in, but what's the thing you're asking me to do? What is the context I'm going to be asked to do it in? And what's the scope or scale of that? If I'm a salesperson, am I responsible for a territory? Am I responsible for the United States? If I'm a marketer, am I developing programs just for one business partner or maybe all business partners? So I think just thinking these things through will sadly put you ahead of 80% of the candidates I've ever talked to. I mean, if someone comes in and has a very good handle on this, we're already interested. Like, oh, this person's not only smart, they've done some real homework and they've thought these things through. And then the last, and again, back to my Uber counter example, values and culture, right? You want to come in understanding what this company is all about and how they think as best you can. And I'd say in today's world, it is much easier to get a handle on values and culture than it used to be, because we all know now that candidates are very concerned about those things. So we try to talk about them a lot. We talk about our community involvement. We talk about our values. We talk about our culture. And I would say a company where you go looking for that and can't find it, that's probably a red flag in and of itself, right? If they're not kind of proud enough of their culture to want to talk about it, that might be an issue. So that's the we kind of covered know yourself, right? Who are you? How are you designed? What are your values? What are you good at? What have you done in your past? You're trying to match that to the company. I think Craig uses the term best fit, right? That's a phrase we use all the time at SailPoint. There are many great people who are not a great fit for our company, right? And that just says you should go somewhere where you can be a great fit, right? And the whole job search thing is ultimately about finding gears, right? It's the company's got a set of gears, you've got a set of gears, you're looking for a fit and a mesh. And when you find that, that's when it feels great, because you're clicking and the company's clicking, right? So, or else, if you're run over by the gears, that doesn't feel so good. But that's a different. That's this talk. No, that's another talk. Okay, so that's that. Let me hit these this next set around hiring questions. Yeah, I'm a little sad we lost the build, Craig. That's okay. I love you. Are you an Apple guy? Is that what happened? Did we go from Microsoft to Apple? But it's a Dell. Dude, you're getting a Dell. It says right there. Old ad, sorry. Okay, real hiring. I'm kidding. It's not a big deal. The real hiring questions. Number one, who do you know that I know? I guarantee you the first thing all of us do today is when we hear about somebody, we go to LinkedIn. So if you're not on it, get on it. I used to resist it. I gave in. I absorbed into the board. It's over. We're all on LinkedIn. The first thing I do is go look on LinkedIn and go, do I know somebody this person knows? Because I may talk to them before I talk to you, but I will almost certainly talk to them after I talk to you if I like you. If I don't like you, I probably won't. But I'm gonna use that person who I already know and trust as a sanity check on what I think I found out when I talk to you. So always assume that in today's world, people will find a connection to you that you may not know they know. We used to, in the old days, before LinkedIn, this was much harder, we used to call it a back channel reference, right? Guess what's true? When you ask a potential candidate for 3 references, they don't give you people who are going to say something negative. I don't know if you knew that. I know, shocker, right? So the goal in hiring was always to say, I would like to find someone who this person didn't give me a reference, and here's how we always treated it. If that person says positive things, great, because that probably aligns with what I already thought. If that person says negative things, A, it depends on what they said, and B, it doesn't mean we're done necessarily. It means I may need to do some more digging. So the reason I bring up that little point for you guys is don't freak out or panic that you might have a negative reference out there in the world somewhere. We all do, right? I doubt any of us have ever had 100% satisfaction and collegiality with everybody we've ever worked with at every job. If you are that person, we have a pool up here we'd like you to walk across. I think at the end of the day, those are out there, but understand that in today's world, it is very easy to do these back channel references, so they will be done. Right? I will start to try to figure out who you know that I know, and I will use that trusted person to either validate my positive opinion, or if I'm somewhat questioning, I will try to get a clarity from that person of what I picked up on this. Is that a thing for them, or did they just answer that question funny? Those are the kind of things we'll do there. Big question number 2, do you seem like you would fit here? Again, in a company like ours, and I think this is true of most of the good companies you would ever want to work for, culture matters. And so one of the first things we do is try to assess, is this person going to fit here? Now, understand, that does not mean everybody there is exactly alike. That means there's a type of style, and we'll get to this in the ideal team player at the end, of people who seem to fit with us. We don't have all extroverts or all introverts. It's not those other dimensions. It's sort of a cultural and values thing primarily, but you're just looking for, given what I know of this person and the kind of role they're going to go into, will they fit? Another not so shocking observation. The kind of people that fit in a sales organization are different than the kind of people that fit in an engineering organization, right? You might fit really well in an engineering organization because you're an engineer, but if we put you in the sales force, they would scare you and you would run away scared, right? That's what happens to sales people exposed to engineers, or engineers exposed to salespeople. So the fit thing is often, by the way, if you do get into like often you're talking to peers or maybe a first line manager, if you're talking to a second line manager or higher, I guarantee you that's the primary thing that person's thinking about. That other people are assessing your competence and whether you can do the job and how good you are at it. That most senior person in your interview cycle is the person going, does this person fit here? Because their job is to not create problems, which we'll get to on question number 4 in a second. The third question is a little bit unique to certain kinds of hiring and not others, but I have this big idea that when I'm talking to people, I'd like to know if they're a specialist or a generalist, and there is no right or wrong there. I just want to know. The reason is, now we'll get back to some scope and scale things we talked about a minute ago. Sometimes in a really young company, the more general you are, the better, because everybody's wearing 5 hats. So I need you to do a little of this and a little of that and a little of the other thing. So sometimes being a generalist is a tremendous asset in a smaller organization. Conversely, sometimes when you get bigger, you need very deep specialties, right? We recently hired a full-time director of tax accounting. I didn't even know that was a thing. So like there's a lot of specialty when you get bigger, and I guarantee you when we were small, we had one accounting guy who kind of did everything that was accounting. All the accountants are looking at me going, he's such an idiot. And that's how it worked, right? We just kind of got the generalist, and that person was smart enough to bring in the specialties when we needed them. So that specialty athlete, and I use the athlete term because it said musician, right? Are you the kind of person who is going to excel at one really detailed thing, and that may be exactly what I need, so that's what I want? or I might need somebody who's kind of more general because I'm not exactly sure what I need or what I want, and I need it to be more free form over time, right? Then the last one, and this is my not so politically correct phrase, will you be a cancer-causing agent? Sadly, most of us that are mature in management have learned over the years that no matter how good someone is, if the people around them hate work, I slowed down for emphasis to pick up on this. If the people around them hate working with them, it is not worth it. And I had to learn that the painful way. I almost guarantee you, anybody who's got this gray stuff or doesn't have any stuff up here has learned this some way or another. It is a painful lesson. And by the way, this is completely discipline independent. There are jerks in accounting. There are jerks in sales. There are jerks in engineering. There are jerks in marketing. You can be a jerk and be functionally quite diverse. But we don't want jerks, because what I've learned is people who are jerks cause other people who are good to leave, and that's bad. So I will just tell you right now, if you are a cancer-causing agent, you should fix that before you go on your next interview, because nobody wants that. And here's another sad little hint I'll give some of you. I had a friend once who was in a professional practice, I won't even identify the kind of practice, who I think had gone through 27 front office clerks in 4 years. And he said, it is just so hard to get good help. And a few of us lovingly said, there might be another thing going on here. Might be you. Maybe 27 people didn't roll through in 4 years because you couldn't find good help. Maybe you're a jerk. I don't know. Maybe you should think about that. So, and we said it with love because we're good people. And the point here is that you really need to be careful that when you describe negative, for instance, here's how this can come up in an interview. I do super simple interviewing techniques like listen for how many times I hear I versus we. Ever thought about that when you're in an interview? If you get asked, what happened on that project you worked on? I did this, I did this, I did this, I did. Wow, were there other people in the vicinity of you and all this was happening? Oh yeah, no, I was part of a team. Gosh, it didn't sound like it for a second there. All I heard was you. So there's ways to tease this out, but I would encourage you that if you have struggled with like not having people around you feel like they liked being on your team, that's definitely the kind of thing that Craig and his team maybe can help you with. They might even refer you to other psychological people to help you with that. But I will tell you that this is a big, I've had to look some incredibly competent people in the eye, great salespeople who knock their quota out year after year, unbelievably talented engineers, and say, you know what, you're not going to be able to stay here. And it's stunning to them because they've always been so awesome at what they did. It never occurred to them that that wasn't enough. And I'm just telling you, I think the world is getting more and more difficult for that kind of personality. So I sometimes use another word that I won't use, but there's a word that kind of is equivalent to jerk that we use in less polite company. That's what we're talking about. Those are the people we don't want in our company. And so we will be pretty ruthless about trying to ferret that out at the beginning. And if we make a mistake, we'll try to deal with it pretty quickly. And I'm just telling you guys, one of the things I find is when people are in the job search mode, sometimes they think all these other reasons are why they're not finding the right thing. Do some serious soul searching on question 4. If that's the reason, be honest and get some help. Because if you're that negative influence on a team, you are going to be a sole proprietor because nobody's going to want to work with you, right? And so just, I always emphasize this because it's so sad to me when super competent, super experienced, super capable people totally sabotage themselves this way. It's like, don't do this. Just stop being a jerk. You're great at what you do. Stop being a jerk. Stop talking down to people. Start treating people badly, etc. Okay, enough negativity. Second to last slide. And then this guy, Pat Lencioni, has written a lot of business books. I like his approach. He's very much about how important organizational health is versus strategy. But he wrote a recent book called The Ideal Team Player. And he basically, I'm oversimplifying a 200-page book, so apologies. Basically comes down to 3 core things: hungry, humble, and smart. Let's explain what that means: hungry, smart, and humble. Hungry is sort of that thought of ambitious, right? The idea that you aren't satisfied with kind of being where you are, you want to progress. That doesn't mean you have to be aspiring to run the company. It just means you want to get better. That can mean you just become the best darn tax accounting person in the world, but you just want to get better at what you do. That idea of hungry for growth and the opposite would be, stasis or just, status quo. I just want to float through this and get through it as best I can. Smart, two thoughts here, IQ and EQ. Again, a lot of people get confused and they only think about IQ. I am so darn smart, of course you'll want to hire me. And EQ gets at that last point, which is if you don't know how to emotionally deal with people, very few jobs involve not talking to any other people. So that EQ smart is a big deal. And then humble really just means you get that you're not the whole center of the universe, that I question, right? It doesn't mean you have to impersonate a nun. That's not what we're saying. It means you get that it's not all about you. My favorite definition of humility, which I've now heard it's attributed to both C.S. Lewis and Rick Warren, but I think it's Rick Warren, but anyways, is humility is not thinking less of yourself than you should. It's thinking of yourself less. There's always sort of, and then you go back to thinking about yourself. No, I'm kidding. The point there is humble people are not people who aren't aware of their competence and the value they add to the organization. They just get that it's not just them that's making the organization successful, it's the team. So I'm just not thinking about myself, I'm thinking about the goals of the team and the value of the team, and that's the kind of humility we're talking about. And then the last point I'll make on this slide here is that all three matter. Let me do some really quick things that he does much better in the book, right? Let's drop one at a time. If you fail on the hungry thing, right, you can be really smart, capable, you can be super humble, but if you have no ambition, most people in growing companies don't find that great. And I am biased toward growth companies, but if you're in a company that's growing and changing, you need the people to grow and change with you. And so if the person is like, no, I'm good, no, I don't really want to do anything like this ever for my whole life, please don't ask me again. Right? That's not generally the kind of person you want in an organization that's growing and changing and needs help. Let's remove the second one, right? They're ambitious and they're kind of, humble about it, but they're not very smart. These are the people that break glass. So, right? They will waltz into something and either emotionally or intellectually don't understand what's happening around them and go, whoops, something breaks. That's one of the ones that can often be corrected with training for what it's worth, but just be aware. And then that third one is sort of what we already covered with the no jerk rule, right? If you're, matter of fact, those are the most dangerous, honestly, right? The super ambitious, super smart person who wants to roll over everyone else, you're called a Wall Street broker, right? That's greed is good, right? If that's your world, that's great, but you don't tend to play well with others. It doesn't play well with others. It said on your kindergarten report card, right? So just some food for thought, if you got the time, not only buy Strengths Finders, buy Ideal Team Player, probably the best investment of about $30 you'll make. So lastly, and then we'll wrap it up and get you onto your regularly scheduled program. And this again, I'm supposed to have just the guy and then this, but the thought here is just, hey, don't do this alone. I mean, the great thing about what Craig and his team have built is a wonderful community and network to support you as you're going through this. And none of us are completely self-aware. None of us are completely objective about ourselves. So the value of these kind of processes and sitting with coaches is to have them help you assess yourself, because you can't be objective about yourself, right? You can't. And so you don't want to do this alone. You want to get some teammates. I mean, part of this is always in community. I mean, Craig, I'm stealing their thunder, but when people are looking together and encouraging each other, the likelihood they're going to find something goes way up versus someone doing the search on their own. I know statistically that that's true, right? So find some teammates, find some coaching, find some mentoring in this process, and then the Job Seekers Network is great for that. So some thoughts, I hope they're helpful. If they're not, hey, you didn't pay anything for this. So in that sense, there you go. All right, thank you.